Today, we're tackling something that you, our listener, brought up, this really fascinating idea of finishing.
Yeah, finishing creative work or really any complex process.
Exactly. You're keen on understanding these kinds of processes. And we thought, well, what's more universal than trying to actually finish something, a project, learning something new, bringing it to some kind of close?
It's a great topic. And we've got some interesting sources to help us dig in. There are excerpts from a review of a Lucian Freud biography.
The painter, right?
Yep. And also a collection of these short aphoristic statements called dynaxioms. They're sort of like little insights on art and creativity. So our mission today isn't just to define finishing. We want to get into the psychology of it, the doubts, the illusions, even why we sometimes avoid it.
Trying to offer those aha moments, without making it feel like homework.
Precisely. We want it to resonate, give you something to think about.
Okay, so finishing. It sounds like it should be the easy bit, doesn't it? You start, you work, you finish. But it's often not that simple.
Not at all. Our sources suggest it can actually be harder than starting. The initial stress kind of fades, but then these new doubts, new uncertainties creep in right near the end.
I definitely recognize that feeling. You think you're almost there, and suddenly it's like, wait, is this right? Should I change this? A whole new set of questions.
And that Freud biography piece has this great little anecdote. It mentions Freud when his paintings were looking, pretty much done.
Yeah.
He'd apparently step back and mutter to himself, how far can you go?
Wow. So even at the very end, he's questioning the limits.
Exactly. It shows this intense internal struggle, this drive to push boundaries, even when completion seems imminent. It makes you question if finished is even a static thing.
Right. It feels more fluid, and that connects to something else that came up, how time feels weird when you're deep in creative work.
Oh, yeah, that time distortion thing.
Where days can just draw on, but then you look up and weeks or even months have just vanished.
Totally. And that definitely messes with your perception of how close you are to actually being finished.
So how do we, frame this idea of finishing then, if it's so slippery?
Well, one of the dynaxioms offers this quite clinical but useful take. It says, finishing art is the temporary resolution of cognitive dissonance.
Okay, cognitive dissonance. That's like the mental discomfort when you hold conflicting ideas, right? Or when things don't quite fit.
Exactly, that internal friction. So finishing in this view isn't about reaching perfection. It's more about reaching a point where that internal conflict just settles down.
Even if just temporarily.
Even if just temporarily. It's a psychological settling as much as anything else.
That makes it feel less like reaching a summit and more like finding a plateau. It's temporary truce with the work.
Yeah, a truce. I like that.
Now, another big theme that came up was perfection, this drive for it.
Ah, yes. The perfection trap.
One of the dynaxioms just lays it out there. Art is never finished. It is merely abandoned.
That's a powerful one. It really challenges the whole notion.
It does. It basically says value is subjective. It changes. So chasing some fixed idea of perfection is maybe pointless.
Yeah, maybe futile is the word. And think about that in terms of learning. Like you, our listener, wanting to be well-informed. If you waited for perfect, absolute understanding before feeling finished with a topic,
you'd never move on. You'd be stuck researching forever.
Exactly. At some point, you have to sort of abandon it, let it go, even if you know there's more out there.
It does kind of take the pressure off, thinking about it that way. And it's funny, isn't it, how often the real meaning or your understanding only clicks after you've stopped working on it so intensely.
Oh, absolutely. Another dynaxiom touches on this. Very often I discover what a piece is about after it's done. It suggests the knowledge is actually in the doing and the finishing.
The act itself generates the understanding.
Right. And then something as simple as giving it a title comes into play. Another dynaxiom points out how titles sort of package the finished work.
They give it a frame.
A frame, a handle, maybe a layer of meaning that wasn't even obvious during the process.
Yeah, that makes sense. It helps you and others make sense of it. And looking back, talking about something you finished, it often clarifies things too, doesn't it?
Definitely. Like that dynaxiom about retrospective discussion. Clearing up past ambiguities, explaining it to someone else forces you to articulate it, and that solidifies it for you.
Okay, so if finishing is this complex, maybe even elusive thing, are there ways to kind of navigate it? Strategies?
Yeah, the sources offer some interesting approaches. One is almost sidestepping the finality by serializing work.
Serializing, like in a series?
Kind of. The example given was a musician rearranging their old songs they'd presumably finished years ago.
Ah, so taking something done and reworking it giving it new life.
Exactly. It keeps the creative flow going without that big, scary, full stop.
That's clever. It's like saying, this chapter's closed, but the story continues. It fits with that other dynaxiom, the one suggesting maybe everything is in a state of being unfinished.
It does, doesn't it? It just reframes the whole idea of completion. It's less of an endpoint.
So it's more about phases than finality.
Perhaps. And another angle is this idea that sometimes the real creative heavy lifting is in posing the right questions. So the dynaxiom suggests that if you frame the problem or the question well enough, the actual execution, the finishing, can almost feel, well, perfunctory, like the groundwork was the main event.
Huh. So even just setting up the exploration can feel like a kind of finish in itself.
Yeah, completion of the conceptual stage, maybe.
Yeah.
Setting the direction.
I like that. And practically speaking, there was that mention of keeping lists, working in series, ways to just keep the ball rolling.
Right, allowing ideas to branch off naturally without getting bogged down and finishing every single one perfectly right now. That seems super relevant for learning to connecting different bits of info over time.
Definitely. Now, what about external factors, like where the work ends up?
Oh yeah, context, that's a big one. The dynaxiom points out how the location where something appears, a gallery, a website, a report, can make it feel temporarily complete.
But then if you take it out of that context,
It can suddenly feel unfinished again. Think about data in a specific report versus seeing it compared with conflicting data elsewhere. Suddenly it feels less final.
that makes total sense. And then there's the digital world. That creates a whole paradox, right?
Totally. That dynaxiom about digital art always looking perfectly finished on screen.
But being potentially editable, changeable, never truly fixed online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us to technology in general. There's that great Douglas Adams quote, and the dynaxiom links it to finishing, suggesting that if we always waited for tech to be absolutely perfect and finished,
Nothing would ever get released. We'd still be waiting for version 1.0 of everything.
pretty much. It's a reminder that progress often means embracing a kind of useful unfinishedness.
So between the internal stuff, like that cognitive dissonance settling,
Right, that idea that it feels finished when it just stops bothering you.
and these external factors like context and technology, what else drives us to actually call something done?
Well, deadlines obviously play a huge role. Sometimes, as one dynaxiom notes, the deadline arrives just as your memory of the initial spark is starting to fade anyway.
A convenient coincidence.
Or maybe a necessary one. And then there's audience feedback. Another dynaxiom mentions how often viewers will suggest changes to a piece the creator thought was finished.
Right. So finished isn't always the final word, even after you've said it.
It highlights that it's often not just a solitary decision. It's a negotiation between the creator, the context, the audience.
It really is this constant back and forth. And I like that other thought, too, that the finishing is sometimes somewhere in the doing.
Yeah, that's a lovely one. It suggests the process itself can be the resolution. The value isn't only in the final object, but in the journey of making it.
Even if a final thing isn't the main goal or doesn't quite materialize as planned.
Which leads to this really fascinating, almost philosophical point. Maybe sometimes the best work or the deepest understanding happens entirely in the thinking stage.
You mean without ever making the physical thing?
Yeah. A dynaxiom proposes exactly that sometimes the better art is thinking about the art rather than doing or finishing it. Ideas can resolve themselves without objectification.
Wow. Like Leonardo da Vinci and all his unfinished projects, maybe they were finished in his head.
Perhaps. Finished in spirit, as the source material suggests.
Yeah.
It completely broadens what we might mean by finished.
It really does. And it connects to that idea of prototypes in modern art too, right? Where the unfinished look is part of the point.
Exactly. The exploration is made visible. It's presented as a step, not necessarily the final word.
So wrapping this up then, it seems like finishing is way more complicated and more interesting than just ticking a box.
Definitely. We've seen it's tied up with psychology, perfectionism, discovery, strategy, context, tech, even just the balance between thinking about something and actually doing it.
It's much more fluid, more subjective than you'd think. Less about a fixed endpoint.
And more about, temporary resolution, maybe deliberate abandonment, or sometimes just achieving clarity in your own mind.
Where do you feel that tension, that pull between wanting closure, wanting it finished?
And the ongoing process, the journey of discovery that might feel like it could go on forever. And maybe ask yourself, is there anything you're working on or learning about that might actually feel finished in spirit, even if it's not technically done?
Something to chew on. It definitely gives you a new lens to look at how you approach, well, everything you do.